And we're one day closer to the backyard brawl. And what better way to start this Tuesday, August 30th, than with the Morning Pitt right here on Panther-Lair.com. Of course, you can get the Morning Pitt every morning on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You subscribe to our YouTube channel, that button right there. You can click that, and then you'll always know when we post a new Morning Pitt video, which we do every morning, Monday through Friday, just to bring you up to speed on everything that's going on in the world of Pitt sports, whatever you need to know about that day, everything from yesterday or a couple days ago if we need anything else to catch up on, and what's going to happen today in the next few days. It's a way to get your day started with Pitt stuff. Every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. we do the live Panther-Lair show. It's like a Pitt talk show where I talk for a while and you post comments in the chat section there, and we interact a little bit. We kind of go back and forth like a talk show. But each morning, Monday through Friday, we do the Morning Pitt, where it's just kind of a news show. It's an update show just to get your day started with a little bit of Pitt content. I know Pitt fans always want more Pitt content, and that's what we're here to give you. So appreciate you checking out this edition of the Morning Pitt. Make sure you like the video, and like I say, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is big for us. And you know the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. And yesterday on Panther-Lair.com, Monday morning, we ran our projected 2-deep because it was finally coming. The first official depth chart of the 2022 season will be released, and it was. And so we put our projection out there. I didn't do too bad. Mostly got it. Wasn't too far off. Missed on a couple things. There were a couple things that sort of surprised me. But, you know, it was pretty close. But I don't think there were too many surprises that were expected. I think you could pretty much call this. I think Pitt fans who've been following along in our training camp coverage could more or less probably have predicted this. There were a few things that stood out there that was interesting, even though I think I projected this one. Izzy Abanikanda getting a solo designation as the starter at running back. That's a little bit unique because we often see oars there, and that was actually one of the things that stood out and was asked about first during Pat Narduzzi's first in-season press conference yesterday. He was asked about not having an oar at the running back position. They go Izzy Abanikanda, Rodney Hammond, and then Vincent Davis or Sibo Flemister. Like I say, I projected that Izzy would get the solo designation as the starter. I didn't... I kind of thought that would be the case because he's been really good. He's gotten a lot of praise through training camp. And I mean, you know, if you've listened to the Panther-Lair show before, read columns or talked to me about Pitt football, I mean, I'm very high on Izzy Abanikanda for this year and beyond. I mean, I think he's really, really good. I think he's an NFL quality running back. And it only makes sense that Pitt would turn to him as the bell cow in this offense. If they want to have one back be the lead back, it only makes sense that it would be him. He's the most likely candidate. He's the one that it would seem to fit the best. And so it was a little bit, it was unique to not have the or designation there, but not altogether surprising because, like I said, I think Izzy Abanikanda is going to be the guy. Moving on through the offense, not really any big surprises. You know, my projection for a 2-deep had them with 2 receivers and 2 running backs, with Daniel Carter getting a mention at fullback. Carter's not listed on the depth chart. Instead, they listed 3 receivers, along with a running back and a tight end. Daniel Carter, I think, is going to see the field a lot this season. I think he's going to play a fullback, H-back role. My guess, to some extent, is that part of the reason they didn't put him on there is because they don't want West Virginia having too much of a thought about an H-back running around out there or a fullback running around out there. So if Neil Brown is watching this show, as I'm sure he does, he's probably going to be getting to work on tracking down this fullback they might have out there, because that would be a departure from the offense last season. And the reality is, though, I think Neil Brown and his defensive staff are probably watching a lot of film of Frank Cignetti offenses from Boston College, and heck, maybe even from Pitt, 12 years ago, to see kind of what to expect out of a Cignetti offense. And those offenses inevitably included a fullback. So I don't think Neil Brown is going to be too surprised to see Daniel Carter on the field for probably a decent number of snaps. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 20, 30 snaps in the offense, maybe more. I think he's going to play quite a bit. We'll see what his touches end up looking like, but I think he's going to be on the field a lot. Offensive line more or less went the way we expected it to go. They ended up listing 3 players at right tackle, Gabe Hoy, Mac Gonsalves, and Jason Collier in that order with no or designations. Now, we've told you that Gabe Hoy has been limited in training camp, and we actually expect Mac Gonsalves to get the start. We'll see what ends up actually happening on Thursday night. I think they're in good shape either way. I think if Hoy is able to be healthy and be ready to play, you've got, a 60-year senior with a ton of playing time and starting experience under his belt. That's a good situation. And if he's not ready to play and Gonsalves has to play, Matt Gonsalves has been the most heralded reserve offensive lineman for the last 3 years. And for good reason. When he has played, and you could go back to 2020 and look at when he played against Virginia Tech and even his performance against Clemson, he was one of the few bright spots in that Clemson game in 2020. And then up into his playing time last season, he's been pretty good. And I think he's a good run blocker, which will help some of the emphasis shift in this offense to be a little more balanced. So a little surprised at how they listed it. Not going to be surprised if we see Mac Gonsalves as the guy on Thursday night at right tackle. Flipping over to defense, I think it's not necessarily a surprise, but it is something we can observe from the depth chart. And it follows what we reported out of training camp and what we talked about. The top 6 at linebacker really, I think, is pretty solidified. And I think, like I say, this is what we talked about coming out of training camp. I think we more or less knew this, but seeing it on paper really kind of hammers it home that, your top 3 of Servassier Dennis, Bengali Kamara, and Shane Simon, those are your 3 guys. Now, somebody in the depth ranks could have a really good practice today, the final, they always have that Thursday, that perfect Thursday they're shooting for. And we've seen guys move into the starting lineup as a result of that final practice of the week. Maybe that could happen today, and somebody could jump over Dennis or Kamara or Simon. But my guess is, that's going to be your starting 3. Dennis in the middle, Kamara at the star linebacker, which is that wide side of the field, and then Simon at the money linebacker, which is the short side of the field. And behind them, you got Brandon George as the top middle linebacker reserve, and then Solomon DeShields at star and Tyler Wiltz at money. Again, what we expected to see. And we do expect to see all those guys play quite a bit. George, I think everyone kind of deduced from a video that Pitt put out, was limited in training camp. So we'll see what his participation looks like on Thursday night. But DeShields and Wiltz are going to play a lot. Buddy Mack might get out there as well. I think you could see Shane Simon operating as a backup middle linebacker if Brandon George is not available, in addition to the work that he's going to get at money linebacker. I think Servassier Dennis is going to play all 3. I think Shane Simon could move a little bit between money and middle. And I think if they want to get Solomon DeShields on the field, but they don't want to take Bengali Kamara off the field, I think Kamara can play star or money. So you've got versatility there to mix and match your groupings. And I think that group has a pretty high ceiling. And I was a little bit surprised about the cornerback listing. I really thought my projection, and it's what I thought would happen, was you'd have Marquez Williams listed as a starter at 1 cornerback spot. And then the other spot would be an or. It would be the starting job would be AJ Woods or MJ Devonshire, because those 2 have been battling it out to take over that starting job that was left vacant by Damari Mathis. And we've talked a lot about those corners and how they should be able to pick up where they left off. That Devonshire and Woods both played 400 snaps each last year, more than 400 snaps each last season. So they're not young guys. They're not inexperienced players. Woods is a senior and Devonshire's a redshirt junior. They were both in the same recruiting class coming out of high school. So they've been around a long time, and they've played a lot. But the way the listing actually ended up is AJ Woods as the starter. No or designation. And in fact, MJ Devonshire is listed behind Marquez Williams. And so that's interesting. And of course, we all pore over the depth chart and we break down the 2 deep, and we'll do it every week for the whole season. I'll probably talk about it right here on the Morning Pitt every Tuesday of the season. We'll talk about what the new depth chart looks like. And the caveat that always comes with it is that, this is what the coaches are willing to put on paper on Monday. It's not necessarily what the game, it's what it's going to look like on Saturday, or in this case, Thursday. Usually, almost always, we see differences, and beyond just, they came out with a different formation on offense. And so you don't read too much into it, but a distinction like that when Woods and Devonshire have been battling, and the coaches have acknowledged that they're battling for that starting job throughout training camp, to then go and list them not just as or starters, but with no or whatsoever. And in fact, moving Devonshire over behind Williams, not even behind Woods anymore. It's interesting to me. Maybe it indicates that A.J. Woods really did win that job. Now, you're still going to see M.J. Devonshire a lot. I think you're going to see Rashad Battle a lot. They put Rylan Gandy and Noah Bigelow on here as third reserves or second reserves. I'm not sure how exactly, if you have a third guy on the depth chart, are you the third reserve or are you the second? It's like you're the second backup, right? Anyway, they're going to rotate at least 4 guys in and keep them all moving on, at cornerback. You're going to have those guys moving around out there and playing a lot. And so no matter who takes the field on the first snap of the game, you're going to see all those guys play quite a bit. And then the other thing, the last thing that stood out about the depth chart, really maybe one of the most notable things, and it speaks to one of the themes that we've been talking about, all summer and all through training camp, 15 listed seniors are put as starters here. And that's not counting David Greedy and Devin Danielson, who are both seniors and are or starters at defensive tackle. I counted that only once. You could count those guys both and you'd have 16. But at the 22 positions on offense and defense, there are 15 seniors listed as starters. And again, that's counting Green and Danielson as one. That's a remarkable amount. You've got a senior starter at running back, wide receiver, left tackle, left guard. The entire offensive line. I'm not even going to bother with it. Defensive end, defensive tackle, defensive end, middle linebacker, money linebacker, free safety in both cornerback spots. 7 on offense and 8 on defense. That's ridiculous. That's a lot of senior experience coming in there. And again, this is something that we've sort of talked about a lot. And I think I talked a lot about it on yesterday's Morning Pitt when I talked about how these guys have all been through this experience of winning an ACC championship and seeing what it takes. It's just really impressive. It's impressive to see it on paper like that, and to know you're going into a game with this many senior starters, including potentially all 5 offensive linemen. That's a heck of a state to be in. That's a strong position to be in. So they released the depth chart with the first official game notes yesterday, and of course that all came as a predecessor to Pat Narduzzi's first in-season press conference of the year. And I figured every Tuesday we'll come out here, we'll break down the depth chart. If there are changes, there are no changes. How the depth chart will get a lot less interesting after when we get to week 2. It's very interesting right now for the first official depth chart of the year. It'll once we kind of get into the routine of the season, it's going to be a little less interesting. And what we'll probably end up doing is comparing last week's depth chart to what the last week's actual starting lineup was, and kind of play a game of how many. I was comparing my projection of the 2 deep to what the official 2 deep was. We will play a game of comparing what the official 2 deep is to what they actually did on the field. But so we'll do that every Tuesday, and we'll break down Pat Narduzzi's press conference every Tuesday. He'll do it every Monday at noon. We'll come out here on Tuesdays and kind of dig into it and see what stood out. And the reality is, for me, there's not always a lot of things that stand out here. Jim Hammett is really good at this. Jim does a feature every Tuesday morning. That'll be up, probably by the time you watch this Morning Pitt, it'll be up shortly after. If you watch the Morning Pitt right off the bat, Jim's breakdown of Pat Narduzzi's press conference will be it'll be up soon. And if you watch this Morning Pitt mid-morning, then it's already on the front page. You can go check it out. Jim does a great job with 10 takeaways from Pat Narduzzi's in-season press conference. I struggle with that kind of thing because so much of it is just the coach saying what he wants you to hear, as opposed sometimes to actually answering the questions. And so many times the answers are just kind of predictable. I hear the question and I pretty much know what Pat Narduzzi's going to say. I've been covering for 8 years. 7.5 years, whatever it is. I pretty much know what he's going to say. And so it's a little tougher for me to pick those standout highlight moments. But there are a couple things. I think there's always going to be a couple things. And from this from this press conference yesterday, there was a question I asked Pat Narduzzi about, there were a lot of questions about, what does it mean? What have you learned from playing in rivalry games before that you can use as you prepare for this game against West Virginia? What have you learned about this? What have you learned about that? How can you do this? And I thought, one interesting question is, look, they don't typically play this kind of game in week one. And I don't mean a rivalry game. I mean a game against a Power 5 opponent. The only time Pat Narduzzi's teams have faced a Power 5 opponent in the opener was 3 years ago when they played against Virginia. It was the only other time. They've opened against, it was in 15, they opened against, I think, Youngstown State, then Villanova, I think, in 16. 2017, I think they had Youngstown State again. 2018, I forget, Albany maybe. 2019 was the Virginia game. 2020, they opened against Austin Peay. And last year, they opened against UMass. So, you put all those... Look at the recall on me, huh? You put all those in a line, and there's one that's not like the others. And that's Virginia 3 years ago. And they lost that game for a variety of reasons. But I was curious, because it's a different type of opponent to open a season, I asked, what did you take from that game 3 years ago? What did you learn from that game about how you have to approach that kind of opener as opposed to an FCS opener or another non-Power 5 opener? I said, was there anything you took from that as far as how you approach your preparation? And Pat Narduzzi, quote, "Not really. I think that was a crappy game. It was first year of a first-year offensive coordinator. We didn't play very good. Didn't look very good in the first game. I look at that as maybe just a bad-looking offense at that point. We just weren't very productive that night from my recall." And not surprisingly, Pat Narduzzi missed what I was asking. It was more about preparation. It was more about how you get ready for a game like that. Largely because, with all of those FCS and non-Power 5 games, they would just go in with this light playbook and wouldn't do a whole lot with it, right? It was pretty basic when they were playing, obviously the Villanova in 2016 was the most glaring example. The whole offense was hidden away in a vault, only to be unleashed a week later against Penn State. But my question was more about that. Do you have to approach it differently? How does your preparation change, or what did you take from it? But I thought, there was a line that Pat Narduzzi said in that answer, and you might have caught it too, and I caught it, and I think he caught it. I have to go back and rewatch the video, but I think there's a moment where Pat Narduzzi kind of flinches a little bit at realizing what he said. He says, quote, "I think that was a crappy game. It was first year of a first-year offensive coordinator." End quote. Later he mentions about how it was a bad-looking offense at that point. Don't put those bad harbingers on this one, Pat. Talking about a first-year offensive coordinator. You have a first-year offensive coordinator. Are you sure you want to blame that game on having a first-time new offensive coordinator? Doesn't seem like the approach you might want to take. I'm not sure why, I don't know if in the rush to, murder Mark Whipple one more time, we had to bring that up, but, a bit of a Freudian slip there to kind of unintentionally kind of implicate or indict your own, current coaching staff, considering they're also first year. It's also a first time or a first year offensive coordinator with your team, or your first time your team is working with this new offensive coordinator. So maybe chill on the first year offensive coordinator talk a little bit, just a little bit. The other thing that stood out to people and stood out to me too is Pat Narduzzi was asked about his wide receiver group, and this let me find. I'm just scrolling through here. You probably know which quote I'm talking about. Question: 2 transfers at receiver, Konate Mumfield and Bub Means, work their way to the top of the depth chart. What do you see in their journey? How do you see that room as a whole? Narduzzi, quote, "That room gives me chest pains some days, okay? I can tell you that. Just stay right there." Goes on, talks about Konate, talks about Bub Means. Follow-up question: can you say what it is that gives you chest pains? Narduzzi, quote, "Just drives me nuts. Leave it at that." Question: you can't elaborate? Narduzzi, quote, "I wish I could. I won't." Me, I jump in. I say, why? Is it because you're a defensive guy and they're making plays on you? Narduzzi, quote, No. Little detail stuff all the time. Little details. Got to be detailed. And so that quote jumped out to people. Was Narduzzi trashing the receivers? Was Narduzzi criticizing the receivers? Is there something to be worried about with the wide receivers? That there's these issues that are giving him chest pain? And I mean, maybe. I mean, he said it, right? He used the words. He said chest pain, right? I mean, he talked about details. My thought, though, my reaction, and again, this just kind of comes from covering him for 8 years, 7.5 years, however long it's been. My guess is at some point in the last day or two, either earlier in the day yesterday or maybe on Sunday or Saturday during one of their practices, the receivers just weren't very detailed. The receivers weren't very focused. And it might have been one receiver, it might have been a couple of them, it might have been the whole room, I don't know. My guess is it was fresh in his mind, and he fired from the hip, as he is wont to do. And I'm not concerned about the receivers. I don't think you should be concerned about the receivers. I mean, we'll see in the game if we should be concerned about the receivers. But I think those guys are going to be really good. I just think it's just so happens that Pat Narduzzi was asked about the wide receivers at a moment when he was annoyed with the wide receivers. And that's about all I would read into that. Maybe the biggest thing. No. One other thing before we get to it. A lot of questions for Pat Narduzzi yesterday were about the focus on the backyard brawl. How he's preparing his players for a rivalry, how he's educating his players about the rivalry, how he's trying to get them fired up for the rivalry. I feel like a version of the same question was asked probably 7 or 8 times. But that's fine. I mean, this is what we do, and it's a big week, it's a big game, it's a big story. We're going to write about this stuff. We're going to write about it. Everybody's going to write about it. And when the game's happening and when the game is over, this is going to be a big conversation topic. The energy of the rivalry, the intensity, and all that kind of stuff. And Pat Narduzzi is doing typical Pat Narduzzi things. One, he doesn't want to tell you what they're doing to try and get the players fired up about it. He was asked, what are you doing to educate these guys about the history? And he said, well, I'm not going to tell you that. I can't tell you that. So that's off the table. And as continued questions were asked about, how are you instilling in these guys that this game is really important, that it matters? Narduzzi just kind of brushed it off for the most part. Because he's at his point now, Pat Narduzzi is, where he's really focused on the game. And I think what he's trying to do, and what he's probably been attempting to do for a little while now, is find a balance between ramping up that intensity and also keeping the focus on work. And understanding that the intensity is great and the hatred and the rivalry and all those things are important, but you have to put in that work. You have to have that focus in the details, like the receivers, in order to actually win the football game. Your intensity and excitement and all those things are not going to win you the football game. Your work, the preparation you put in, is what's going to win the football game. I think in Pat Narduzzi's ideal world, and I think this is what he will probably attempt to do, he's going to spend, and probably has spent the last week, and we'll spend the next 2 days focused on details, focused on film study, on work, on execution, knowing what you're seeing in West Virginia's offense and defense, how the Pitt's offense and defense need to attack and counter what they're going to see out of West Virginia. I think that's where he wants to keep the focus right now, while slowly kind of building up some of the history. I mean, you can't wait until Thursday night to have all these guys talk to the team. You're going to slowly build up some of the history. And then, but once you've got all that work done, once you've really committed to the focus and the details and the attention to detail, and it's Thursday night and you're about to go out of the locker room, you're about to take the field for the actual game, then he will fire them up and really fire them up. And they'll be fired up. It's not like they're going to go from 0 to 100. But I think Narduzzi will turn on the fireworks right before the game, so that you could take all that preparation and everything that's been done, all that work, and kick it up a notch with the intensity and the energy. I think that's probably what he's going for, and that's why he's dodging these questions right now, because he's not ready to flip that particular switch, to turn that particular dial up to 11. That's just my guess, my take on sort of his answers and his responses. Because, I think there is probably a balance for coaches going into a situation like this, where, you do have to get fired up. You do have to have that kind of energy and intensity, because the crowd is going to bring it, the opponent is going to have it, and you're going to need some piece of it in order to win the game. But you're not going to do it if you haven't put in all the proper amount of work and focused on the details that you need to focus on. And so I think he wants to keep the focus there, before sprinkling on that rivalry energy and intensity. All right, and then the last thing from Pat Narduzzi's press conference, and maybe the biggest announcement out of the whole thing, the thing that got the most reaction, Dave Wannstedt going to serve as honorary captain. I love it. I love it for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think Dave's great. I think for this game, you needed to find an honorary captain who could truly symbolize not just the rivalry with West Virginia. I mean, you needed somebody, I think, that had a connection to the rivalry, somebody who played in it, coached in it, participated in it, and can understand it and is a part of it. But I think you needed someone who is sort of historically Pitt, someone historically linked to Pitt, who they truly are, I mean, that cliche of a Pitt man. I think you needed someone like that who then has that history with Pitt, that history of what Pitt is and what Pitt has been and what Pitt can be, and who has that connection to the brawl, who has participated in it. And you don't bring Dave Wannstedt in just because he won the 13-9 game, although that's freaking huge. There's no question about it. And he won the next year, and then he lost the 2 after that. He lost his first 2 against West Virginia, won the 3rd one, and the 4th one, and then lost the 5th and the 6th. So he was 2-4 against West Virginia in his time at Pitt. And some of those were not particularly pretty. Like 1, 2, and 6 were all pretty ugly as it goes. 5 wasn't anything special either, but all the focus was on the next week against Cincinnati. So it's kind of a moot point, or at least it seemed to be. Dave is the perfect guy for this. I think even more than like a Tony Dorsett, you know what I mean, or a Dan Marino. I think Dave is the perfect guy. I think he still resonates as a figure, as a symbol of Pitt for a large part of the Pitt crowd, and I think they're going to be fired up to see him there. And it sounds like a lot of Pitt alums are coming to the game, so it's going to be, you know, the kind of crowd on the sidelines that gets people fired up and gets people excited. But, you know, Dave, I hadn't really put much thought into who should be the honorary captain, but when Pat Narduzzi said that, I said, that's just perfect. That's exactly who it should be. That is the perfect honorary captain for this game. There's no question about it. All right, last thing I want to get to, soccer, the other football. Because don't look now, but Pitt men's soccer is 2-0 after 2 wins over top 10 opponents. Pitt themselves is the top 10 team, but they beat Georgetown, who was number 2 in the country. And then last night, they had their own backyard brawl and beat West Virginia 3-0. Soccer talk for 3-0. You know, we'll keep an eye on soccer. Obviously, it's not one of our focal points here. But for Pitt to get to 2-0 with wins over a pair of top 10 teams, I mean, like, look, Pitt fans, if you want more Pitt sports to get excited about, I think there are a few candidates for your attention. But definitely the men's soccer team is competing right there, because 2-0 with wins over top 10 teams, including the backyard brawl, their own backyard brawl, beating West Virginia last night. It's pretty good stuff. So we'll keep an eye on that football team as well. All right, we'll be back. We'll got more backyard brawl preview content coming for you the next 2 days. Listen, we have a schedule change on the live Panther-Lair show. We usually do it Wednesday nights at 6:30. We're not doing it tomorrow night. We're going to put a little space between the show and the game. We're going to do it tonight. So you're watching this video now. You're watching this video throughout the day. Come back to this YouTube channel tonight at 8:30 p.m. Subscribe, and you'll get a notification to know when we go live for an hour or more of Pitt sports talk on the Panther-Lair show. We get the chat screen going. You can post your comments and your questions. I'll read your comments, react to them. I'll read your questions and answer them. We'll have back and forth. It's a talk show is really what it is. It's like a talk show. Just instead of you calling in, you post your comment in the chat screen, and we get it going. It's going to be a lot of fun. So schedule change. Don't forget, tonight, 8:30 p.m., youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll be live for the Panther-Lair show. Of course, every morning, Monday through Friday, we have this, the Morning Pitt. It's available for you on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe, and that way you can guarantee that you will always know when we post a new video, a new Morning Pitt, any other exclusive Pitt video content, or even when we go live for our live streams, the weekly call-in show, usually on Wednesdays, this week on Tuesday, and also our post-game show, which we are going to do after West Virginia. So we've got that to look forward to. I don't know what time that's going to be. I keep saying 1:30. So somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, we're going to go live on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And there might be 4 of you here. There might be 40 of you here. There might be none of you here. I'm going to sit here and talk for like half hour or an hour or however long I feel like talking. And then I'm going to click close. And I'm going to go to bed, and I'm going to come up and I might do it before I go to bed, but I'm going to release it as a podcast. So it'll be like a combo Morning Pitt live stream. We're going to do it all at once. So make sure you, stay up for that if you want. I think it's going to get weird. It should be fun no matter what. But anyway, I thank you for checking this show out today. Make sure you like our video. I really appreciate that. Post comments if you got them. I appreciate that very much as well. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much. Have a great Tuesday. Talk to you tomorrow. We're getting one day closer. Can't wait. We'll talk to you Wednesday morning. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.